Your soulmate made a secret plan, Miami. You must read this. And the moment that quiet plan first began forming in their mind was not dramatic or obvious to anyone around them. It happened during a calm evening when life felt almost too predictable, the kind of night when routines move forward automatically and a person suddenly realizes how much time has passed without any real change. Your soulmate had been sitting alone with their thoughts, reflecting on different parts of their life, the path they had taken, and the small decisions that had slowly shaped the direction they were walking in. For a long time they had followed a rhythm that felt stable and responsible, the type of life pattern many people build where responsibilities, expectations, and daily routines quietly replace the bold dreams they once carried when they were younger. Yet on that particular evening something inside them began asking deeper questions. They found themselves wondering whether life was meant to feel this predictable forever or whether there were still moments of courage waiting to happen if they allowed themselves to listen to their heart more honestly. During that reflection, one memory began appearing repeatedly, and that memory was connected to you. It did not arrive suddenly like a dramatic flash of the past, but rather like a quiet reminder that certain connections never fully disappear from a person's emotional world. Your soulmate may have realized that whenever they thought about moments in life that felt genuine and emotionally real, your presence appeared somewhere in those memories. Perhaps it was the conversations you once shared where both of you spoke openly without needing to hide your thoughts. Perhaps it was the way time seemed to move differently when you were together, as if the outside world briefly paused and allowed the moment to exist on its own. These types of experiences often stay with a person because they reveal something rare about human connection, the ability to feel understood without needing to explain every part of yourself. As these memories continued returning, your soulmate began noticing that their thoughts were no longer just about the past but also about the future. They started asking themselves whether the life they were living now truly reflected the emotional truth they once felt during those moments. That question led to another thought that at first seemed completely unrelated but slowly began attaching itself to those reflections. The thought was about Miami. At first it appeared as nothing more than a mental image of a place associated with warmth, movement, and new beginnings. Miami had always represented energy and possibility in their imagination, a city where people arrive carrying plans they are not yet ready to share with the world. The bright coastline, the rhythm of the ocean, the constant movement of people chasing new opportunities, all of it created a sense that life there was always in motion. Your soulmate may have smiled slightly when that image first appeared in their mind because it felt almost like daydreaming. But the more they reflected on their life and the feelings connected to you, the more the idea of Miami began appearing again. It was as if the city represented something symbolic rather than literal. It represented the courage to step outside familiar routines and follow an idea that felt uncertain but meaningful. Your soulmate began imagining what it would feel like to make a bold decision connected to that place. Not just a temporary escape or casual travel plan, but something deeper, a step that signaled the beginning of a new chapter. As those thoughts grew stronger, they realized that the idea of Miami was connected to the same emotional reflection that had started everything that evening. It was connected to the realization that certain connections and certain feelings had never completely disappeared from their heart. They had simply been placed quietly in the background while life moved forward. That realization made them pause and examine their own emotions with a level of honesty they had not allowed themselves before. They may have asked themselves whether it was too late to follow the feelings they once set aside or whether life still allowed room for unexpected decisions. The thought of Miami began transforming during that moment. It was no longer just a place on a map but a symbol of possibility. It represented the idea that life could still change direction if someone had the courage to follow what felt true instead of what felt predictable. Your soulmate may have leaned back and imagined standing near the ocean there, feeling the warm air and the sense that the future was not already written. In that moment the secret plan began taking its first real shape. It was not yet detailed or spoken aloud, but the intention behind it had already formed. They realized that the idea of Miami felt exciting because it represented action rather than hesitation. For so long they had allowed life to move forward without questioning whether their heart was fully involved in the direction they were following. But now they were beginning to see that some of the most meaningful decisions in life begin exactly this way. With a quiet realization that something inside you is asking for change. The connection they felt toward you had been one of the thoughts that led them to this realization, reminding them of what emotional authenticity once felt like. And now the city of Miami had become the symbol of what might happen if they allowed themselves to pursue that authenticity again instead of ignoring it. Even though the plan remained secret for now, hidden within their thoughts rather than shared with anyone else, it had already begun influencing how they saw their future. It represented the possibility that life still had chapters waiting to unfold if they were willing to take the first step toward them. As the night of reflection continued and the idea that first appeared in your soulmate's mind refused to disappear, the quiet thought about Miami slowly began transforming into something much more deliberate. What had started as a passing image, a warm coastline, bright lights, and the feeling of a city constantly alive with movement, now began attaching itself to the deeper questions your soulmate had been asking themselves about their life. They realized that the thought of Miami was not appearing randomly. It was connected to the emotions they had been exploring earlier that evening, the same emotions that led them to think about you and the connection that once felt so real between you. The more they allowed themselves to sit with those thoughts, the clearer it became that something inside them had been waiting for a long time to break free from routine. For years they may have followed a path that seemed sensible and stable, building a life around responsibilities, expectations, and the belief that doing the practical thing was always the safest choice. Many people move through life exactly that way, believing that stability is the most important goal. Yet as your soulmate reflected more deeply, they began noticing that stability alone does not always satisfy the heart. Sometimes a person reaches a moment when they realize they have been ignoring certain feelings simply because acting on them seemed complicated or uncertain. That realization can be both exciting and unsettling because it opens the door to possibilities that had been quietly closed for a long time. The idea of Miami began representing exactly that kind of possibility. Your soulmate may have started imagining what it would actually mean to make a plan connected to that city rather than simply thinking about it as a distant idea. They pictured what it would feel like to step away from the patterns that had defined their life for so long and take a step towards something that felt bold. Miami in their imagination became more than a location, it became a symbol of change, movement, and courage. The energy of the city seemed to mirror the emotions they were beginning to feel inside themselves. They could almost imagine walking along the shoreline there, hearing the waves, feeling the warm air, and sensing that life had suddenly opened into something new and unexpected. As that image became clearer, your soulmate began connecting it with another thought that had been quietly growing in their mind, the realization that some connections in life deserve to be explored instead of forgotten. When they thought about moments in their life where they felt truly present and emotionally honest, your presence often appeared somewhere within those memories. Perhaps it was the conversations you shared where both of you spoke openly without trying to impress or protect yourselves. Perhaps it was the way laughter appeared easily when you were together, or the way time seemed to pass differently because the connection felt natural. These memories carried a feeling of authenticity that your soulmate had rarely experienced elsewhere, and realizing that now made them see the past in a different light. They may have wondered why they never fully acknowledged the importance of that connection while it was happening. Life often moves quickly, and when people are focused on responsibilities or expectations, they sometimes overlook the emotional depth of certain moments. Your soulmate might have assumed that the connection you shared would simply become another memory as time passed. Yet during this late-night reflection they were beginning to see that it had left a much deeper impression than they ever realized. That understanding made the idea of Miami feel even more significant. It began to symbolize the possibility of choosing authenticity instead of routine. Your soulmate may have started thinking about practical details as the idea developed. They imagined what it would be like to visit the city or even spend meaningful time there. They pictured exploring new streets, hearing unfamiliar sounds, and feeling the excitement that comes from stepping into a place where the future feels unwritten. But more importantly, they realized that the plan forming in their mind was not only about geography. It was about courage. It was about allowing themselves to follow the emotional truth they had been avoiding for so long. The thought of Miami became connected to a simple but powerful question: what if they stopped ignoring the feelings that once felt so genuine? What if they allowed themselves to explore the possibility that certain connections were never meant to disappear completely? As these questions moved through their mind, the plan slowly became more than just a dream. It began turning into an intention. They may not have written anything down yet or told anyone about it, but the decision inside their heart had already started forming. Your soulmate realized that if they wanted life to feel alive again, they would have to take a step that felt different from the choices they had been making for years. The idea of Miami was the first step in that direction, a symbol of movement, courage, and the willingness to follow a feeling that had been quietly waiting for attention. Even though the plan remained secret for now, hidden within their thoughts rather than spoken aloud, it had already begun shaping the way they looked at their future. They understood that sometimes the most meaningful journeys begin exactly this way, with a quiet decision made in the stillness of night when someone finally allows themselves to imagine a different path. As the idea continued developing in your soulmate's mind, the quiet reflection that started earlier that evening slowly turned into a deeper internal conversation about what they truly wanted from life. The thought of Miami was no longer just a distant image of warm beaches and bright city lights. It had become something symbolic, something connected to a feeling they had been ignoring for a long time. When people allow themselves to think honestly about their lives without the distractions of daily routines, they sometimes begin noticing emotions they have quietly pushed aside. That was exactly what was happening during this moment. Your soulmate realized that many of the choices they had made over the years were shaped by practicality rather than emotional truth. They had followed a path that seemed responsible, predictable, and stable, believing that stability alone would eventually bring fulfillment. Yet as they sat there thinking about the future, they began understanding that fulfillment often comes from moments when someone listens to their heart rather than simply following what feels safe. This realization was not sudden or dramatic. Instead, it unfolded slowly, thought by thought, as they considered the memories that had returned earlier in the night and the feelings connected to those memories. The connection they once shared with you kept appearing in their mind, not as a distant story but as a reminder of a time when they felt emotionally present in a genuine way. Perhaps it was the honesty of your conversations, the way both of you could speak openly about thoughts and feelings without worrying about being misunderstood. Perhaps it was the sense that when you were together, the world outside those moments seemed quieter and less complicated. Experiences like that tend to remain powerful in a person's memory because they reveal what authenticity feels like. Your soulmate may have realized that those were some of the few moments in their life where they truly felt free to be themselves. Recognizing that now made them question why they had never followed that feeling further when the opportunity first appeared. Life often pulls people in different directions, and sometimes timing or circumstances prevent certain connections from continuing the way they might have if everything had aligned perfectly. Your soulmate may have accepted those circumstances at the time, believing that moving forward without looking back was the best decision. But during this quiet reflection, they began seeing those events differently. They realized that even though time had passed and life had changed, the emotional authenticity of those moments had never completely disappeared. Instead, it had remained part of their inner world, quietly shaping how they understood relationships and emotional honesty. As this realization grew clearer, the idea of Miami began taking on a deeper meaning. It was no longer simply about visiting a city or imagining a change of scenery. Miami had become a symbol of action, the possibility of choosing a path that felt emotionally true rather than simply continuing along the predictable road they had been walking for years. Your soulmate began picturing what it would feel like to actually follow through on that idea. They imagined arriving in a place that represented movement and transformation, standing near the ocean where the horizon stretches endlessly, and feeling as if the future had opened into something new. Cities like Miami often carry an atmosphere of reinvention, where people arrive with plans that are still forming and hopes that are not yet fully defined. Your soulmate felt drawn to that energy because it mirrored the change they were beginning to feel inside themselves. They started thinking about the possibility that life might still hold unexpected chapters waiting to unfold if they were brave enough to begin them. The secret plan forming in their mind was not only about travel or location. It was about the courage to follow a feeling that had quietly remained in their heart for years. They may have imagined the steps it would take to turn the idea into reality, picturing themselves making arrangements, exploring the city, and allowing the experience to guide them toward whatever future might be waiting there. But even more important than the practical details was the emotional meaning behind the plan. Miami had become the place where they could step away from routine and reconnect with the part of themselves that believed life should feel genuine and alive. The connection they once shared with you was one of the reasons that feeling had resurfaced so strongly. It reminded them of a time when emotional honesty felt natural rather than complicated. As these thoughts continued moving through their mind, your soulmate began understanding something important about themselves. They realized that the reason the idea of Miami felt so powerful was because it represented a choice they had never made before. The choice to follow authenticity instead of predictability. Even though the plan remained secret for now, still forming quietly in their thoughts rather than spoken aloud, it had already begun changing the way they looked at their future. They understood that sometimes the most meaningful journeys begin not with a ticket or a map but with a single decision made in the heart when someone finally allows themselves to believe that a different path is possible. As the quiet reflection continued and the idea that had begun forming earlier in the night became more defined, your soulmate found themselves thinking not only about the possibility of Miami but also about the deeper reasons why this plan felt so important to them. By this point, the thought had evolved far beyond a simple travel idea. It had become a symbol of something much more personal, a turning point in how they wanted to approach their life moving forward. For years they may have followed routines that seemed logical and necessary, building a life around responsibilities and expectations that felt safe but sometimes emotionally distant. Stability often creates a sense of security, and your soulmate had likely believed that security was the most important goal. Yet during this late-night reflection, they began realizing that security alone does not always satisfy the deeper needs of the heart. Sometimes people reach a moment where they start questioning whether the life they are living truly reflects the emotions they once believed in. Your soulmate may have asked themselves when the last time was that they felt genuinely excited about the direction their life was taking. As they searched for an answer, their thoughts continued returning to the same place, the moments in their past when they felt most authentic and emotionally present. And once again, many of those memories seemed connected to you. It was not necessarily about specific events or dramatic situations. Instead, it was about the atmosphere of those moments, the ease of your conversations, the way both of you could share thoughts honestly, and the feeling that the connection between you did not require effort to maintain. Experiences like that often stand out later in life because they represent something rare, an emotional honesty that is difficult to replicate. Your soulmate may have realized that the connection you shared had quietly influenced their understanding of what meaningful relationships should feel like. Even though life eventually carried both of you in different directions, the memory of that authenticity had never completely disappeared. As this realization became clearer, the idea of Miami began transforming again in their mind. It was no longer simply a place associated with change or adventure. It became the setting for a decision they had never made before, the decision to follow what felt emotionally true instead of continuing along a path that felt predictable. Your soulmate may have started imagining how their life might change if they allowed themselves to take that step. They pictured the energy of the city, the sound of the ocean, the bright lights reflecting off the water at night, and the sense that life there moves with a different rhythm. One where people arrive carrying hopes for new beginnings. Miami began representing a fresh start in their imagination, a place where they could step away from familiar routines and rediscover the part of themselves that once believed in bold decisions. As they continued reflecting, they realized that the secret plan forming in their mind was not about escaping their life but about reconnecting with it in a more honest way. Sometimes people create plans like this when they feel a quiet urge for transformation, when they sense that their heart has been waiting for a chance to move in a different direction. Your soulmate understood that the idea of Miami was connected to that urge. It was the physical expression of an emotional realization that had been growing inside them. They may have even started imagining what it would feel like to actually arrive there, walking along the shoreline as the ocean stretches endlessly toward the horizon. Standing in a place where the future feels open can make a person realize that life is not always as fixed as it once seemed. Your soulmate may have thought about how powerful it would feel to take that step, to allow themselves to explore possibilities that once seemed too uncertain. At the same time, they recognized that the plan carried a deeper emotional meaning as well. The memories of your connection had played a role in bringing them to this realization, reminding them that authentic experiences deserve attention rather than being left behind in the past. That understanding made the idea of Miami feel even more significant. It was not only about change but about courage, the courage to follow a feeling they once believed was impossible to revisit. As the night moved forward and their thoughts continued unfolding, your soulmate realized that the secret plan had already begun shaping how they saw their future. Even though no one else knew about it yet, the decision forming in their heart had already changed something inside them. They understood that sometimes the most important journeys begin quietly, with a single idea that grows stronger each time a person allows themselves to imagine what life might look like if they chose authenticity over routine. As the idea continued growing in your soulmate's mind and the quiet hours of the night gave them more space to think, the secret plan that first appeared as a simple thought began turning into something far more deliberate. By this point, they were no longer wondering whether the idea of Miami meant anything at all. They were beginning to accept that it represented a decision that had been waiting to happen for a long time. The more they reflected on their life and the direction it had taken over the years, the clearer it became that certain feelings had remained quietly present beneath the surface. Life had carried them through many experiences, responsibilities, and changes, but some emotional truths had never completely faded. One of those truths was connected to the authenticity they once felt when they were around you. When they thought about moments in their life where they felt genuinely understood, where conversations flowed naturally and emotions were expressed without hesitation, those memories often included you somewhere within them. Your soulmate may have realized that those experiences had quietly shaped how they understood meaningful connection, even during the years when they were not actively thinking about the past. Recognizing this now made them see their emotional history differently. Instead of viewing the past as something that had been neatly closed and left behind, they began understanding that certain connections leave impressions that continue influencing the heart long after circumstances change. That realization made the idea of Miami feel even more significant. It was no longer just a destination or a symbol of adventure, it was beginning to represent a step toward reclaiming the part of themselves that believed life should feel genuine and emotionally alive. Your soulmate may have leaned back in their chair or rested quietly while imagining what that step would look like in reality. They began picturing themselves making preparations, thinking about travel details, exploring the possibility of visiting or even spending meaningful time in the city. But beyond the practical considerations, the plan carried a deeper emotional meaning. Miami represented movement. It represented the courage to shift direction instead of continuing along the same predictable path. For a long time, your soulmate may have believed that the choices they made in the past had permanently shaped their future, leaving little room for unexpected turns. Yet during this moment of reflection, they began realizing that life rarely remains as fixed as it seems. Sometimes the most powerful decisions appear later in life when a person finally recognizes what their heart has been trying to say all along. The connection they once shared with you had reminded them of what emotional authenticity feels like, and that reminder had quietly awakened the desire to follow that feeling again instead of ignoring it. Miami became the place where that desire could take physical form. Your soulmate imagined the atmosphere of the city, the bright sunlight reflecting on the ocean, the warm air carrying the sound of waves, the vibrant streets filled with movement and possibility. They pictured themselves walking along the shoreline at sunset, feeling the sense that something in their life had finally begun shifting in the direction they always wanted but never allowed themselves to pursue. These images may have seemed almost like daydreams at first, but the more they returned to them, the more real the plan began to feel. It was no longer just imagination, it was the beginning of an intention. Your soulmate realized that if they wanted their life to feel alive again, they would have to take a step that required courage. The secret plan forming in their mind was exactly that step. They understood that it might take time before the idea became reality, but the decision inside their heart had already been made. The thought of Miami had given them something they had not felt in a long time, a sense of excitement about what might come next. As they continued reflecting, they also recognized that the connection they once shared with you had played a meaningful role in awakening this realization. The memories of that authenticity reminded them that certain experiences deserved to be explored rather than forgotten. Even if life had taken both of you in different directions for a while, the emotional truth of those moments remained part of who they were. That understanding gave the secret plan a deeper sense of purpose. It was not simply about travel or change for the sake of adventure. It was about following the feeling that life should be guided by authenticity rather than routine. By the time the night reached its quietest hours, your soulmate understood that the idea of Miami had already begun shaping their future. Even though the plan remained private for now, something inside them had shifted. They were no longer looking at their life as something fixed and predictable. Instead, they were beginning to see it as a journey that still held unexpected chapters waiting to unfold if they were willing to take the first step toward them. As the quiet reflection continued and the secret plan began settling more firmly in your soulmate's mind, the idea of Miami slowly transformed from an exciting possibility into something that felt almost inevitable. By this stage, it was no longer simply a late-night thought or a moment of emotional curiosity. It had become a direction. Your soulmate realized that something inside them had already shifted, and once that shift happens it becomes very difficult for a person to return to the same way of thinking they had before. For years they may have been moving through life in a steady and predictable rhythm, following responsibilities and routines that seemed sensible but rarely left space for deeper emotional exploration. Stability can make life feel safe, yet sometimes it also creates the quiet illusion that everything important has already happened and that the future will simply repeat the same patterns. During this moment of reflection, your soulmate began seeing that idea differently. They understood that even though time had passed and many things in their life had changed, the feelings connected to certain moments from their past had never completely disappeared. When they thought about times in their life where they felt most genuine, where conversations felt honest and the connection between two people did not require effort, those memories still carried a clarity that surprised them. And once again, many of those memories involved you. The connection you once shared had not simply been another passing chapter in their life, it had quietly shaped how they understood emotional closeness. Your soulmate may have realized that this was the reason the idea of Miami felt so powerful. It represented the courage to move toward authenticity instead of remaining inside a life that felt predictable but emotionally distant. They began imagining what it would feel like to actually follow through on the plan that had been forming in their thoughts. The more they pictured it, the more vivid the experience became. They could almost see themselves arriving in the city, stepping out into the warm air, hearing the distant sound of the ocean and the energy of the streets filled with people chasing their own dreams. Miami has always been a place where people arrive searching for something new, whether it is opportunity, reinvention, or simply the freedom to begin again. That atmosphere made the idea feel even more symbolic to your soulmate. In their imagination, the city became the setting for a turning point, a moment when they could step away from the patterns that had defined their life for so long and follow the feelings they had once set aside. They began thinking about practical steps as well, considering what it would take to transform the idea into reality. They imagined planning the journey, exploring the city, finding places that felt meaningful, and allowing the experience to guide them toward whatever future might unfold there. Yet the plan was never only about geography. The deeper meaning behind it was emotional. Your soulmate understood that this decision represented a willingness to listen to their heart in a way they had not done before. The memories connected to you had reminded them of what emotional authenticity feels like, and that reminder had awakened something they had been ignoring for years. Instead of seeing the past as something closed, they began realizing that certain connections continue influencing a person's life even after time has passed. Those experiences become part of how someone understands what is meaningful and real. Miami, in their mind, became the place where they could finally act on that understanding. They imagined walking along the shoreline at sunset, feeling the warm breeze coming off the ocean and realizing that the future was still unwritten. Moments like that can make a person understand that life is not limited to the path they once believed was inevitable. There are always new directions waiting to be discovered if someone is willing to take the first step toward them. Your soulmate may have felt both excitement and uncertainty while thinking about this plan, because meaningful decisions often carry both emotions at the same time. Excitement because the idea of change brings energy and possibility, and uncertainty because stepping into the unknown always requires courage. Yet the more they thought about it, the more they realized that the feeling of excitement was stronger than the hesitation. For the first time in a long while, they felt as though something new was beginning to unfold in their life. The secret plan had become a quiet promise they made to themselves, a promise that they would no longer ignore the feelings that once made life feel authentic. Even though the details of the journey were still forming and no one else knew about it yet, the decision inside their heart had already been made. Miami was no longer just a distant city in their imagination. It had become the symbol of a new chapter waiting to begin, a place where they could finally follow the truth they had been carrying quietly for years and see where it might lead them next. As the idea of the secret plan continued developing in your soulmate's mind, the realization that something meaningful was about to change in their life became stronger with each passing moment. What started as a quiet reflection had now grown into a feeling that felt almost impossible to ignore. They understood that the thought of Miami had become more than a symbol of travel or adventure. It had become the representation of a decision they had been avoiding for a very long time. For years they may have told themselves that certain emotions belonged in the past, that life had already taken its course and there was no reason to revisit feelings connected to earlier chapters of their life. But during this deep reflection they began understanding something important. Emotional truths do not disappear simply because someone decides to move forward without acknowledging them. Instead, those truths remain quietly present beneath the surface, influencing the way a person sees the world and the relationships they form. Your soulmate realized that the connection they once shared with you was one of those truths. Even if circumstances had taken both of you in different directions for a period of time, the authenticity of that connection had never faded completely. It remained in their memory not as a distant story but as a reminder of what it felt like to experience something genuine. This realization may have been both comforting and surprising at the same time. Comforting because it reminded them that those moments were real and meaningful, and surprising because they had not expected to feel that sense of emotional clarity again after so many years. As they continued thinking about it, the idea of Miami began representing the next step in understanding those feelings. It became the place where they could finally stop ignoring the voice inside them that had been asking for change. They began imagining what the city might look like when they arrived, picturing the vibrant streets filled with music, movement, and the energy of people chasing new beginnings. Miami has always been known as a place where stories restart, where people arrive carrying plans that are still forming and hopes that are not yet fully spoken. That atmosphere made the city feel almost symbolic to your soulmate. In their imagination it was not just a destination but a doorway into a different chapter of life. They pictured themselves walking along the coastline where the ocean stretches endlessly into the horizon, realizing that the future is rarely as fixed as it once seemed. Standing in a place like that can make a person understand that life still holds possibilities waiting to be explored. The secret plan forming in their heart began to feel less like a dream and more like a promise to themselves. It was the promise that they would no longer continue living entirely within the boundaries of routine and expectation. Instead, they would allow themselves to explore what life might feel like if they followed authenticity instead of predictability. Your soulmate may have started imagining the small details of that journey, the moment they would step off the plane, the warm air surrounding them, the feeling of knowing that they had taken a step towards something meaningful rather than remaining in a life that felt unchanged. But more than anything, they understood that the plan was connected to an emotional truth. The memories of the connection you once shared had awakened something inside them that had been quiet for years. It reminded them that certain experiences are too important to be left behind without reflection. Authentic connections have a way of shaping how someone sees the world long after the moment itself has passed. Your soulmate realized that this was exactly what had happened. The honesty and openness they once felt when they were around you had remained part of their understanding of what emotional closeness should feel like. The thought of Miami became the place where they could finally act on that understanding instead of simply remembering it. As these thoughts continued unfolding, they recognized that the secret plan had already changed something inside them. Even though the journey had not begun yet and the details were still forming, the decision in their heart had already created a new sense of direction. For the first time in a long while they felt a quiet excitement about the future. They realized that life is not always defined by the choices made years ago. Sometimes the most important decisions appear later, when someone finally understands what their heart has been trying to say all along. Miami had become the symbol of that moment for them, a place where courage, authenticity, and the possibility of new beginnings could finally meet. And as the plan continued forming quietly within their thoughts, your soulmate understood that the journey they were imagining was not simply about going somewhere new. It was about becoming the person they always hoped they would be when they finally chose to follow what felt true. As the quiet hours of reflection slowly moved toward their end and the idea that had been forming throughout the night settled deeply in your soulmate's mind, they realized that the secret plan connected to Miami was no longer just a thought they could casually dismiss. Something inside them had already changed. When a person reaches a moment of emotional clarity like this, it often feels as though a door has quietly opened inside their heart, revealing possibilities that had been hidden behind routine and hesitation for years. Your soulmate understood that the reflections they experienced had not appeared randomly. They were the result of many thoughts and feelings that had been building gradually over time, waiting for the moment when they would finally be acknowledged. The memories of your connection had played an important role in bringing those feelings to the surface again. Whenever they thought about times in their life where they felt most genuine and emotionally alive, those memories often included you. It was not only about specific events but about the atmosphere of those moments. The sense of honesty in your conversations, the ease with which both of you could express your thoughts, and the feeling that the connection between you existed without pressure or expectation. Those experiences left an impression on your soulmate that remained long after circumstances changed. Even though life had carried both of you into different directions for a while, the emotional authenticity of those moments had never completely disappeared from their memory. Realizing that now made them understand why the idea of Miami felt so powerful. The city had become a symbol of movement and transformation in their imagination, a place where people arrive searching for new beginnings and unexpected opportunities. Your soulmate began seeing the plan not as an escape from their life but as a step toward reconnecting with the part of themselves that believed life should feel meaningful rather than simply predictable. They imagined the moment of arriving in Miami, stepping out into the warm sunlight and hearing the distant sound of the ocean waves moving steadily along the shore. That image carried a feeling of freedom. It suggested that the future was still open, still capable of surprising them if they were willing to take the first step toward it. The more they thought about it, the more they understood that the secret plan was not just about geography. It represented courage. It represented the willingness to acknowledge emotions they had once set aside and to explore what might happen if they followed those feelings instead of ignoring them. Your soulmate realized that many people go through life believing that their most important decisions are already behind them, that the direction of their story has been written and cannot be changed. But this moment of reflection showed them something different. Life still had chapters waiting to unfold if they were brave enough to begin them. Miami became the place where that new chapter could start. They imagined walking along the vibrant streets filled with music and movement, feeling the energy of a city where people constantly arrive with hopes that have not yet taken shape. In that atmosphere they could finally allow themselves to rediscover the excitement of possibility. The connection they once shared with you had reminded them what authenticity feels like, and that reminder had awakened a quiet determination to seek that feeling again. Your soulmate may have understood that they did not yet know exactly what the future would look like, but for the first time in a long while they were willing to explore it instead of simply accepting the path they had always followed. The secret plan had already begun transforming the way they looked at their life. It gave them a sense of direction that felt guided by honesty rather than habit. Even though the details of the journey were still forming and the plan remained private for now, the decision inside their heart had already been made. Miami was no longer just a distant city in their imagination. It had become the symbol of a turning point. The place where they would finally step forward into a future shaped by courage, authenticity, and the willingness to follow what their heart had been quietly telling them all along.